off with Anthony Pearl.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter, and to all of you, including those of you out there in cyberspace. It's great to be here. I'm going to start by reminding people of some bigger topics, and I think that relate to this dialogue subject. The first one is that there's more than one kind of innovation. And before we get too far along, I'd like us to focus on an important distinction that can help cut through some of the buzzwords, the management speak, and the marketing slogans that come along with this territory and city making. Innovation is about doing something different. Successful innovation is about doing something different that adds value to a city. Canadian and Australian cities are filled with examples of innovation that do not add value, and actually some of them destroy value. And one big example, which is relevant to today's location, are urban expressways, which were built through the heart of almost every urban region in Canada and Australia, except for this city that we're in today. Vancouver showed the world that you could build a North American city without putting cars ahead of people and come out with a result that was actually better. And that was a radical innovation for the 1970s, which has paid dividends to this day and generating lots of value in neighborhoods like this one. So successful innovation is not just about doing the right thing, it can also be about not doing the wrong thing. And I would suggest that building great cities requires the ability to distinguish between the two and find the right mix of both. Conventional wisdom is always hard to resist. Many cities go for the flavor of the month style of innovation. Does anyone in here remember the hydrogen highway that was supposed to be running now from Whistler down to Tijuana, Mexico, using Canadian-made fuel cell technology that would be clean and green? Well, for the 2010 Olympics, Whistler pioneered North America's most expensive bus fleet to be at the leading edge of this innovation, running with hydrogen fuel cells designed here in British Columbia. That innovation has not turned out to generate much value, other than the lesson that fuel cells are still not ready for widespread use in a transportation system. So how do we avoid falling for the wrong kind of innovation in our city making? The wisdom of crowds, which I guess Councillor Meggs has been at the sharp end of, because it's not always polite and pleasant, has worked fairly well over time in this region. We've made above average use of collective wisdom through participatory planning, through events like this one. And when our fearless leaders are tempted by the conventional wisdom of whatever's being peddled to the 1% at events like Davos or Bilderberg, then events like these help save them from falling into the trap of the Me Too rush to global convergence on something that might not work. So for all its limitations, I think the Livable Region Strategic Plan, the Regional Growth Strategy offer examples of an alternative approach to city making that has a better chance of finding successful innovations for our urban future. And I think this approach to talking through our future does go against the grain of some who have embraced a cult of government efficiency. To paraphrase Oscar Wilde, the only problem with participatory planning is that it takes up too many evenings. You know, sorting out these ideas that are worth embracing from those that deserve a pass is labor intensive. It takes more staff, it takes more skilled professionals, and it takes more time. But I think we get a return for that investment that's pretty important. Another point that I would like to bring up is that there's a relationship between risk and innovation that is proportional to the type of assets, the longevity of the assets that are involved in implementing that innovation. That's why building a 10-lane bridge across the Fraser River, which is the world's second widest bridge now, is more risky in terms of innovation than adding bicycle lanes to Dunsmuir and Hornby streets here in Vancouver. Both the bridge and the bike lanes represent innovative transportation planning and infrastructure. But it'll be a lot easier to adjust the bike lanes if we want to take account of unintended consequences or changing circumstances than it would be to change the Newport Man Bridge. So the more that city building strategies invest in hard assets that will be around for generations, the more risky that innovation turns out to be. And the more important, I think, that the kinds of dialogue and discussion and collective wisdom are to making the right decisions so that we don't wind up with white elephants like Mirabel Airport or the Olympic Stadium in Montreal. Those kinds of innovation failures can put a stop to urban sustainability efforts for decades at a time. I think I'll close at that point and maybe come and touch on some other points during the dialogue, but thank you very much.
So, good afternoon, and thank you on behalf of the City of Vancouver for inviting us here to speak to you today. In my 5 minutes, I'm going to try to address several of the questions posed for the session, wrapped up into a single question. How did Vancouver become one of the world's most livable cities while accommodating rapid growth? In 1986, which I think began the era of rapid growth in this region, our region had about 1.4 million people. Vancouver had about a third of those, sitting on about 4% of the region's land base. 25 years later, in 2011, the region had added about 1 million people. Vancouver had accommodated about 180,000 people. So in that time, we'd accommodated roughly 20% of the region's growth on that 4% of the land base. Looking ahead, this region plans to accommodate another 1 million people over the next 30 years or so, and about 600,000 jobs. The bottom line for Vancouver is that we've accommodated rapid growth, and we're going to have to continue to do that in the foreseeable future. So what are the three key principles that underpin Vancouver's success? The first, I think, is our focus on participatory planning, as Anthony mentioned, but supported by quality urban design and public policy making. Our goal is to create a home for everyone. We're a city of neighborhoods with a long history of innovation in public engagement and planning. With the advent of new tools and approaches, we're engaging more citizens than ever, despite what you read in the press. Participatory planning also means working with cooperatively with the development industry and the business community, because we know how important it is for them to play a role in building our communities. Our attention to quality urban design and the emphasis on public realm and pedestrian experience looks to produce design excellence, variety, mixed use, mixed income and ages, and respect for community character in our plans. An example of design and policy innovation I'd like to explore is a move towards gentler and invisible density that we introduced in our single-family areas. We did this in two ways. One was the allowance of full basements, which produced more suites, making home ownership more affordable. And the second was through infill laneway housing. We're now at about 1,000 laneway houses either built or in process in the city. Another example of innovation is the removal of residential potential in the central business district and our rezoning policy around office uses around our rapid transit stations and industrial areas. Those two policy moves have produced roughly 7 million square feet of office projects now that are either being built or on the books in Vancouver. In Vancouver, a home for everyone is a combination of not just people, but jobs for the city. The second element that I'd like to talk about is the focus on ensuring that civic facilities and amenities come with that growth. In Vancouver, we've done that by ensuring that new development shares in the cost of providing those new facilities. We have a long history of doing this, and about a decade ago, we set in motion a citywide policy framework for those contributions. Perhaps best loved, and many of you enjoy this on a daily basis, I'm sure, is our seawall and waterfront park system. But those amenities go far beyond that. They extend to community centers, libraries, daycares, school sites, neighborhood houses, public art, cultural facilities, heritage conservation, and of course, affordable housing. The benefits of this approach include the provision of those facilities early to serve existing residents. They help to market those new developments. And from our perspective, they also take the pressure off tax increases that we would otherwise have to pay from existing taxpayers. We're also looking to return some of the value created by these new developments back to our citizens. To give you an idea of what that does for the city, over the last several years, we've been getting something in the order of about $140 to $150 million a year from new development towards those facilities, services, and amenities. The third element is a focus on intensifying land use and providing affordable housing in locations supported by regional transit. Regional transit investment has made it possible to grow the city's population and employment base, particularly in the downtown, while also seeing a decrease in private auto use entering the downtown. The C-Bus and the Expo line in the 1980s, the Millennium line in the early 2000s, the Canada line in 2010, and the future Broadway subway will provide the City of Vancouver with roughly 30 rapid transit stations in the city. Examples of some land use and transit innovations include the Olympic Village, which achieved a LEED ND Platinum rating, and of course the award-winning Cambie Corridor Plan, which integrates land use, transportation, and energy to take sustainable redevelopment in existing communities to a new level. Innovative zoning and other incentives are also now delivering affordable market rental housing. We now have about 3,800 units and counting in process. By intensifying land use and affordable housing around our transit, we can deliver walkable, livable communities for everyone. So to wrap up, in Vancouver, our future will build on these past successes, and notice a lot of the easy growth has been done with the development of brownfields and those new communities. Going forward, the focus is on integrating growth within existing communities while maintaining our reputation as one of the world's most livable cities, and of course, trying to be the most green city in the world by 2020. Thanks.
Thank you, and good afternoon. So I'm a developer, and I'm a little bit out of the typical here. I think I'm sitting with a lot of regulators and politicians and academics, and who are very much in charge of conceiving the way our cities are going to be developed. And the developer's job is to sit within that and figure out what it all means and how to deal with it. And in Randy's well-planned, well-transit served, rich infrastructure, vibrant super city, what do you do when you get to the very center and you want to stay there, especially if you're 25 years old and you're working in your first couple of jobs? It's quite evident that the flip side of these very successful cities is affordability and accessibility for a wide range of people. The very people that a lot of us come to these cities to see, the young, the vibrant, the energetic, the artful. So I want to talk today about microlofts. It's a type of microhousing that we've been very involved with, and whether it's just having its 15 minutes of fame or is a meaningful new trend in housing, or more seriously, is it an innovation in land and economic sustainability or a return to the inner city tenement? We've talked about innovation. In 2013, our company was awarded the most innovative company in BC by BC Business Magazine for its microloft project in Vancouver's downtown east side. Now, I don't say that to brag, but only to draw out the significance of, like, when would you ever think that a real estate developer would be given an innovation award? Certainly, it's not what comes to mind when one talks about developers typically. So what does that mean, that over the tech companies and over the biotech and everything else that we think around innovation across all industries, it was a small real estate development of 30 apartments in the downtown east side. So just to bring out some of our thinking on what a microloft is, I'm going to read from a letter I just wrote to the Director of Planning of the City of Vancouver to kind of explain a little bit about it. The microloft affordability by virtue of size is proving to be a very successful and popular concept. People are readily embracing the concept of highly modal, well-designed and compact homes sited within amenity-rich buildings and, more importantly, amenity-rich urban centers. Microloft housing in this context represents a significant advance in economic and environmental sustainability. It addresses the needs of a very large and often unrecognized group of young people seeking to establish themselves and live in the city at an attainable cost. It's very important that this type of compact and dense housing have not only exceptional and livable interior design and functionality, but that its public face be equally good. The choice of compromise on space and economic consumption should not in any way translate to poor quality or bland architecture. There is nothing apologetic about this type of housing. So what is a microloft? We say it's a 300 square foot apartment with a 3 million square foot living room. The city is your living room, the city is your dining room, the city is your home, and your apartment contains the minimum basic needs to live within that broader public context. If you Google microlofts, you'll find lots of images and videos and news clips, many of which are about our recent projects. Our microloft projects have produced units that range in size from 250 to 350 square feet. A microloft has a full kitchen, fridge, cooktop, wall oven, dishwasher, a full bathroom, a washer dryer, a wall bed with storage and built-in dining table, an entry closet, flat screen TV, balcony or Juliet balcony, and a furniture option. And the biggest feature of all of a microloft is that it has no parking. Why would you want it? Why would you want to pay for it? So who is a microloft for? Whenever we're asked that, we say, when is a microloft for? We think they're for everybody at some stage of their life. And that's clearly what's happening with the people who are picking them up and buying them and renting them. So cities, Urbania, that's why people want to be here. Small is big again. Your living room and dining room are outside your home. The formerly big stuff in your life is small. Your TV, your stereo system, your laptop, your iPad, your bank account, they're all small now. I do not want what I cannot have. We're in a post-recession reality where life can be good. More is not always better. Sometimes less is better. The best places in the best cities are unbeatable. That's where you want to be. Price is everything. Money is cheap. And we don't even need transit in these locations. So in closing, I'd like to think about, in our discussion, where we should build microlofts and where will they work and where won't they work. Where will that equation between price, location, and size make sense in the future? Thank you.
I wanted to talk to you about land use transport integration. I kind of think innovation is actually kind of doing better what you're already doing here and in the world generally. Warren and I have been to many cities in the world over the last 15 years looking at how they do stuff, and I reckon if you get land use transport integration right, you are a long way ahead in building a great city, and that's what you've done here. So that's the holy grail in my opinion. So I don't kind of think, don't look for distractions, keep doing that really well. The serve and shape argument I think is actually a real distraction. It's both. The best way to do land use transport integration is to progress them both at the same time. But in the real world, that's often not the way it works. You end up with one is ahead of the other. If you get the transit too far ahead of the urban development, then you've wasted public resources building something ahead of the time. If you get the land use built too far ahead of the transit, then you get an inefficient pattern of development where people are travelling a long way by modes, which excludes some people from the opportunity to make those trips. So, but that's the reality. So in Brisbane, our city where I come from, it's our capital. It's about the same, just roughly the same metro population, roughly the same growth rates as here. But we have sprawled more than you have because we didn't have the constraints you have. So one of the responses we've had is we've sort of said, okay, we've already got the shape, let's serve it. So we built busways and we built dedicated busways which actually run the traditional buses around the city, get on these busways and act like rapid transit. We've rolled out a lot of those over the last 15 years and they've actually served our city well. They were over capacity from day one and we now have congestion in our busway system, which is kind of a nice problem to have. And so I think that's a really neat innovation for our city. But the other thing that the City Council has done recently has introduced a new city plan. How are we going here? Is everyone happy? Yeah, cool. That's good. I just saw a couple of people starting to nod off. One of the things we've done is our city has released a plan which is actually a transit-focused plan. So the future of Brisbane will be focusing on growth nodes along our transit. We have a heavy rail system, which is a really good system, big people mover. We've got the busways I just talked about, and we've got some routes like your Broadway, which carry a lot of bus traffic, and when you add them all together, give a really good service. And around those nodes, we will be rolling out our growth for strategies for the city. The real trick in this is that about 7% of our city area will be able to do the heavy lifting for our growth in our city. So it's a really neat bringing together of good planning and good politics because only 7% of the city is going to see major change. And that allows us to say at the political level, all of you people out there in your suburban homes that you don't like anything changing in, we're going to leave you alone pretty much. 20 years later, when you can't sell your home because no one wants to buy them anymore, and it's reaching the end of economic life, come and talk to us again. You don't tell them that bit, but So it's it's good planning and it's good politics and it's a neat solution. I guess a couple of innovations there that I'd like to share with you. I just wanted to pick up a couple of themes from the other speakers quickly. I think one of the innovations of your city is exactly as Anthony said. you're more famous in a way for the things you didn't do than the things you did do. So you didn't actually build freeways, you know. And I guess the risk of, we have a saying at home called the seagull syndrome, which we had a lot in our cities where in the 80s and 90s where experts would fly in, do their business on the city and fly out again. And I don't want to be one of those people, but I do want to say I think one of the best innovations in the traditions of what you don't do rather than what you do is please don't have that referendum you're about to have. I just think it's extraordinarily distracting, and I don't know why a city which is leading the world, we come here to see what you're doing in transport and transit investment and how you integrate these things, could actually be seriously contemplating a referendum which says let's not fund transit anymore. So, just lastly, in the microloft stuff, we're building places in our city now in our urban renewal areas that don't have a kitchen. So, because there's so many dining options outside, you might get a microwave if you're lucky, and a little one of those, like it's like a motel room, you know. And they're very popular because people just don't want to prepare meals at home. They've got so many options out in the street. So, but mind you, we come from the subtropics, and it's always really nice out there. So, thanks very much, Peter.
Just very quickly about an innovation in my former city. I'm a reform planning director. I stepped down from the job after 18 years in the Gold Coast. People know the Gold Coast, an hour south of Brisbane, around about 570,000 people, 1,500 square kilometres, 100,000 visitors a night, has had 4 decades of rapid growth, 3 to 4% on base, currently 15 to 20,000 new residents a year move to the Gold Coast from in migration, both interstate migration and overseas migration. It's a polycentric city, which has actually worked for us in a sense in terms of how we want to address our transport issues, and it's a classical Sunbelt migration, tourism, and a very large construction industry that's actually responding to the demand that the in-migration has actually caused. But I think the big one for us is it's less than 4% public transport mode share. So it's a classic, US motordom city. We've got a light rail project, which is a very significant project in a national sense in Australia. I'll just quickly tell you why. It's 13 kilometres, 16 stations. It currently reaches about 20% of the existing population and about 40% of the employment, and that's because of the polycentric nature of the city. But it's significant because it's the first new light rail project in Australia for about 3 decades, maybe even more, but it's certainly the very first in a regional city in Australia. It's a PPP, it's a 3P project, but the interesting thing about the project is it has 3 levels of government funding. So it has our federal government funding, it has our state government funding, but my city decided that this was such an important project that they put $120 million of our ratepayers, of our taxpayers' communities' money on the table, and that was actually the clincher to get the project across the line. Why light rail? Well, the city a number of years ago, when it was visioning, as cities do, about where the threats and weaknesses were, water security was a big one. We were in one of the worst droughts that we've had in southeast Queensland for a long period of time. And transport, they identified as one of the key threats and weaknesses for the future prosperity of the city. It rained, so suddenly we had a lot of water. We actually had so much water that it actually broke the banks and flooded thousands of homes. So that was no longer an issue for us, although we've put a lot of investment into drought securing southeast Queensland, and we're actually now paying for that in terms of, I don't know what you pay for water here, but boy oh boy, in southeast Queensland you're paying a lot of money. For us, it was never just about the public transport aspects and improving the public transport access. Sorry, Peter, what was it? Oh, Brisbane size. Brisbane's population is 2.2. Oh, that's the metro region. Yeah, Brisbane itself is 1.1, and Gold Coast is 570,000. We've had an amalgamation of local governments in southeast Queensland. So your list of sort of metro, if you like. Our list went from 20 local authorities down to 12 local authorities, forced amalgamations. The public transport aspects Clearly it was going to make a difference, but the main thing for us was it was a game changer in terms of city building and city shaping. And we've done a lot of work to really change the urban form of the city around the light rail line. And as Greg said, funnily enough, it must be just this figure, but we're looking at about a 7 to 8% area of the city which will, for the next 20 years, receive most of the change. So it will accommodate 40% of the expected population growth over the next 20 years. I think probably done a lot of travel, as Greg said, mostly for professional development reasons. Actually, I had a clause in my contract at the city that gave me an overseas trip about every year or 18 months for professional development reasons. How about that? City of Vancouver, okay? Because they realised that Australia's a long way from anywhere, and it was worthwhile sending their planning director and others overseas to see and touch and feel, and that's why I've been here about 15 times. And I have this view that the transit land use stuff that Greg was talking about earlier, it is definitely the holy grail. And those cities that are successful around the world have really good transit systems. I mean, you think about those cities that you've been to that you go, this is a great place. They have good transit systems. The ones that are really good and the ones that get voted, the most livable cities, like here, like Melbourne, have really come close to cracking that land use, transit, planning, investment and policy decision-making process. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.